Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In part one of this two-part chat with Paul, we cover his days as an undergraduate at a non-target school in the Midwest. We find out how he managed to break into an investment banking internship at Morgan Stanley and why he pivoted to consulting after a health scare. We learn how he was able to successfully recruit at both a top investment bank and a top consulting firm in back-to-back years. In this part one, we step back to really evaluate his internships and recruiting out of undergrad to find out what really opened the most doors for him. Enjoy. All right, Paul, thanks so much for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Yeah, you bet. Good to be here.
So it'd be awesome if you could give the listeners a short summary of your bio.
Sure. So I went to Wheaton College for undergrad. I played soccer there. After that, I did 3 years at McKinsey. I guess I should say I did an investment banking internship during undergrad. Decided to do 3 years in consulting after school. And then from there, spent 3 more years at Insight Equity, a middle market private equity fund. And I'm now at Wharton doing my MBA.
Very cool. So let's start all the way back at Wheaton and figure out, first off, why Wheaton? Why did you go there? And when did consulting come on the radar, or were you, it sounds like you did an investment banking internship, so that was also on the radar. Tell me a little bit about the decision to go there and then kind of that all unfolded.
Spark story. Yeah. So I decided to go to Wheaton for a couple of reasons. First is that I was recruited to play soccer there, and that was something that I really wanted to do in undergrad. And second, I really wanted to be part of the kind of intentional community that Wheaton had. I wanted to be part of a small liberal arts college that was, focused on building community in small groups, and just really loved the people there. I was really impressed with the people I met when I visited, and ultimately had a great 4-year experience there. However, Wheaton is, a non-target school. And so 18-year-old me didn't really appreciate the choice I was making by going to play soccer at a school like Wheaton, which,
and tell me, just for the listeners who don't know, where is that?
Yeah, so that's in Illinois. So there are 2 Wheatons. This one's the one just outside of Chicago. And yeah, really loved the experience there. It was a math and economics double major. I honestly chose that because I liked math, and I thought, hey, great, like this is the kind of coursework I like. And, if I can focus on that and have to do less of other coursework, then that'll be great.
You didn't love writing?
I like writing a lot more now. It's interesting how things change, the older you get. But at the time, I was like, great, I can just focus on math. And then I noticed that economics, had a lot of overlap. So you get, talking interviews about double majoring, but it was really, honestly, a major and a half. And so I did that, and I kind of knew at some point that I wanted to go into business. I think the writing was on the wall that I wasn't going to be a professional soccer player even by the time I was heading into college. And it was really sophomore year where I started to become more interested in career. And that's when I started to have to figure out, okay, do I want to go into investment banking, figure out what those industries.
Tell me about your family a little bit. What are they in medicine? Are they in something completely unrelated? Are they in consulting?
Yeah, they are. So both my parents are lawyers. Okay. And
they pushing you to go to law school, or they said stay away?
No, both of them were like, stay away, No, they were great. They've been very supportive and just open-ended, let me really explore. And so I came to Wheaton kind of completely blue sky in terms of what I'd be doing afterwards.
Okay, so you're kind of realizing you're not going to be a professional soccer player. Sophomore year comes around. How do you start learning about, this investment banking world and all of that?
So it's funny. I really didn't have a lot of great resources. I think Wheaton has done a great job over the past decade or so of like beefing up their existing career center resources. But at the time, I just didn't have a good source to try and figure out, hey, what should I even be shooting for? I was just a competitive, person that liked numbers and wanted to grow a lot and do whatever the most, interesting and competitive thing could be after school. Um, and my sophomore year, there was an alum who came and spoke, and he gave this talk called "What I Wish I Knew as a Sophomore," and essentially it was a pitch to go get an MBA and in the meantime do either consulting, finance, or tech. That was sort of his spiel, and he had a bunch of interesting credentials. He works in venture capital, and he was just speaking in a really compelling way that wasn't kind of sugarcoating that everything would work out when you left college. And I remember he offered for anyone who was at the talk to follow up with them if they wanted to just, individually pick his brain. And so we talked. He asked what my GPA was and what I was studying, and just based off of my extracurriculars, he was like, Paul, I think you should really consider going into either finance, specifically investment banking, or consulting after undergrad. That's where a lot of other competitive candidates with your kind of background are going from some of these target schools. And if you were to go down that route, I think you'd really be able to compress, 5 years of learning into your first two or so years. And I thought that was kind of great. So that kind of sparked my initial interest.
Very cool. So that was kind of an important mentor, even if it was a passing mentor. Not so that kind of planted the seed a little bit. And so how did you start doing? You started just Googling like crazy about all these different careers, or what was the next step for you?
Yeah, I definitely spent time on Wall Street Oasis, among other sites, and
hopefully not freaking you out.
Yeah, no, there's tons of different sources you can go to. And I think over time, what was most helpful for me was just trying to draw from either, like, obviously my college network, but also friends and family, people who were in those industries or even tangential to those industries. So, like, for example, I remember having a really good conversation with someone in commercial banking who he was a director, and so he was able to put me in touch with somebody on the investment banking side after we had coffee. So just trying to turn over every rock, and slowly over time you kind of get different tidbits of truth from each conversation. And
how long did that take you? So, like, this is your sophomore year so tell me when that first kind of talk happened, and then how were you naturally just aggressive at networking, or was it something that you were awkward at first and then got better? Like, tell me about that.
Oh yeah, it was extremely painful from the start, but you learn over time. The timeline was, I think this guy gave his talk in either September or October.
So early sophomore year, which is good.
Yeah, early sophomore year. And one of the first things that I learned was from some of these initial conversations was, hey, these investment banks, coming from a Wheaton, and unless you've cured cancer or something, like, there's not going to be a sophomore internship opportunity for you. So I think some of these initial conversations really just helped me get a lay of the land and understand what kind of timeline I was working with. I feel like that changes every year for IB. So, like, my timeline is a little bit outdated now, but I had in mind, okay, I need to come back in the fall of junior year ready to talk to people. And now I know that
it's sophomore year. Yeah.
Smiling, yeah.
It's crazy early now. Yeah,
things keep speeding up, but for me that was the time frame. And so I just honestly spent the next call it 6 months going into right before the summer, trying to talk to any Wheaton grads I could find. I mean, there weren't really very many in investment banking, and at the time were hardly any in consulting. So it was talking to one person who might introduce me to another person, or, like, for example, I interned in wealth management after my sophomore year, with my former soccer coach. Like, I found out that he happened to be a wealth manager, and had learned from other conversations that was one of the potential stepping stones to investment banking. And so it was just kind of,
So I get that. So you got a wealth management internship, which is they tend to be easier to get. That makes
yeah,
sense. This was your sophomore summer.
yep, sophomore summer.
That
Yep.
kind of teed up your recruiting for junior year, but there's still no on-campus recruiting, right there, or is there a little
Yeah.
bit?
Oh, yeah, definitely no
Zero.
on recruiting.
Yeah.
Uh,
Or I mean, it's for finance, obviously, for a lot of
yeah.
these
Yeah.
investment banking roles. So how did you even? I see here you ended up with a winter analyst at
Yeah.
Morgan Stanley. How on earth did you even end
Yeah.
that?
Uh, so, I will just add the other thing that I did over sophomore summer was I went to Tuck and I did their bridge program,
Mm,
which is essentially pre-MBA program for liberal arts students. It was 1 month idyllic experience in the summer, up in New Hampshire. Really helpful, kind of a crash course in financial modeling, corporate finance, accounting, all the things that I wasn't taking as a liberal arts student.
yep.
And then I was doing a lot of,
Was that paid? Did you pay for that yourself, or your parents helped cover that? No.
my grandmother helped pitch in a little
Nice.
bit.
Is
And
that
then
is that expensive? That
I
program?
mean, tuition just creeps up every year. So I'm sure that
Like
that's,
a normal tuition for a school. Okay, yeah. I mean, it's through Tuck, right? So
yeah, it wasn't as expensive as normal tuition, but
because
it
it's
was
like a month,
something.
it's a condensed month program. How long were you in school? I'm just curious about that program in case you feel like it's still
Uh,
valuable for other kids.
it was 4 weeks. It
Mm,
was super valuable. And like one thing I found interesting from the program was there were a lot of target school students that were doing this.
mhm.
Not everybody was doing internship. So some people were treating this as their summer experience.
Mhm.
And the other thing I noticed was that a lot of students there weren't proactively trying to network through Tuck. And so I just walked into the career center one day and there's the person who helps, investment banking interested MBA students get jobs. Like, why not see if she has time later on that week? And she ended up being a really helpful resource over the next, 6 months. So I think just going to Tuck from a brand perspective, from the coursework perspective, and just adding more, stones to turn over, I think that was also a really helpful
Like more
piece.
possible connections because the Tuck alum network is super tight knit. So even just saying you went
Yeah.
to that program, although probably not as likely to get you a response. Uh,
Yeah, there was a guy who I shot him a note. I literally combed through. I mean, believe me, everyone who was in IB, and there's a guy at Merrill Lynch who was nice enough to B of A Merrill Lynch was nice enough to come and just grab coffee with me over fall break when I was in New York
hmm.
because I had done this summer program. He was like, "I don't even know what this program is, but great to meet you." And um, yeah, the Tech network was very generous for sure.
That's great. And so you leveraged that. You kind of went back, and then so you're coming in junior year. Are you
Yep.
networking aggressively before, like through the summer during this Tuck thing? And then how are you structuring that? Are you using LinkedIn only, cold calls, cold email? What are you? How are you doing this? How are you keeping it all
Yeah.
organized?
Yeah, I think at the time, gosh, this probably dates me a little bit, but like a lot of people weren't using LinkedIn as like it wasn't as consistent. I'm sure a lot of people had profiles and whatnot, but
Yeah.
at that point in time, it was not the sort of thing that you check every day.
Hmm.
So it also had a really terrible hit rate.
Hmm.
Um, I was just using cold emails. You learn to figure out how templates for emails are structured for different banks.
Which
Um,
we have in the company database for anyone curious.
yeah,
Yeah, we have all this. You don't have to do all the research.
yeah, love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like, just kind of using intuition and trying to dig up as many lists as possible. And the worst that can happen is somebody says doesn't respond, or is like unwilling to talk. I've had plenty of calls where like, I make a mistake, like not using, if I didn't use my full name, like one time somebody told me, like, I don't know which Paul this is. And then you learn, okay, like give them a little bit more context. So
Mhm.
there were plenty of these kinds of conversations where you fumble in the dark a little bit and find your way. And then you actually start liking these conversations. And so
Mhm.
I came basically right up to summer, just talking to as many people as I could. And I guess through the summer too, like tried to leverage the Merrill Lynch network, the Tuck network, and I staged it so that as I came back to campus, um, I essentially reached out to every single person that I had sort of built a relationship with.
Which was how many people? How many people do you think you reached out to? Like 500, 300?
Oh gosh.
Like during that sophomore year through the summer?
Yeah,
2,000, 3,000? How competitive were
honestly,
you?
like the 95% confidence interval is super wide on that. I would say
Okay,
probably like I would guess like genuinely 5 to 750. Like I probably reached out to
500. Okay, so
people.
500, 750 people. And this was, somewhat of a templated thing you'd put together, like for certain people. Were you, what angles were you using in terms of like how you reached out to them? Were you saying like, hey, I noticed you went to a liberal arts college? Were you using like liberal arts alums? Obviously you did the Tuck and you did the Merrill Lynch.
Yeah, I think
Any
because
other, yeah. I'm just curious if you used any other kind of angles.
yeah, definitely. So like if I'm talking to Wheaton students today, I definitely encourage them to take the liberal arts angle.
Mhm.
Um, but like when I was doing this, it wasn't super easy to know who was at each of these banks because there wasn't this like carefully codified LinkedIn network that everyone was expected to be on. It was like, kind of a sloppy, disorganized um, setup at that point. So like I was essentially like trying to find like lists, like I just looked up a huge list of like, here are all the people in Merrill Lynch IB when I was on the, intranet there,
Mhm.
and like literally reached out to all of those people. And it was like, how, like one managing director, like, how did you get this email? Like that kind of stuff.
You're like
Uh,
silent. You're like,
yeah.
did you tell him or did you just run away?
Yeah, I responded, and I honestly can't remember if we had a conversation,
Yeah,
but if we didn't, one of the other MDs and I spoke, and we had a good conversation. So
that's
yeah,
great.
it's just kind of learning to embrace failure because the stakes are low with these conversations as long as you're respectful, and
Right.
just you know,
So okay, so you use kind of more the alum network, the Merrill Lynch network, the Tuck network, and that seemed to get you. You say the
yeah,
hit rate on those. So like out of 500, like emails, cold email slash LinkedIn request slash whatever, would you say like 10% responded to you?
yeah. Let
Maybe.
me clarify. So I
Yeah.
don't think I definitely didn't know 500 bankers.
Hmm.
Like I think in this day and age, it's much easier to like go directly to the tap. But
Right.
like for me, I was looking up anyone in like commercial banking too, and like would
Hmm.
have a phone call with them to ask if they knew anyone on the investment banking side. So,
Right.
uh,
Were they insulted that you didn't want to do commercial banking?
well, I definitely didn't lead with that, but
Right.
it's a delicate
Yeah.
art. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, like I was so pleasantly surprised throughout this entire process. I think one of like the mental shifts for me was just, and now being on the other side as somebody working that gets reached out to, like it does not feel like a huge burden to talk to a student, especially the younger that they're reaching out. Like as a
They're
junior,
freshmen.
junior, it's like okay, what's the angle here? But as a sophomore or a freshman, it's like, oh, here's someone who just wants to talk, hear what I'm up to. Um, if I have time, then I try to make that, especially as somebody who's gone through this experience. And so,
Hmm.
uh, yeah, I think just understanding that these conversations can be helpful and productive and not feel super transactional was like a huge shift for me. Um, but yeah, I'd say the hit rate was pretty good. I tried to craft thoughtful emails so that like the top of the funnel wouldn't get narrowed super quickly, and just kind of vary them a little bit based on the context. But
So what do you
uh,
think your hit rate was? It can be rough range. So like out of say, let's say it was 500, was it like 50 people responded? 100? That high?
um, yeah, I mean, just because a lot of this was like my college or like
It
family
was
or
almost 20%. You think that high?
um,
30%?
I would say higher than that.
Wow. Wow.
Uh,
Really good.
Whedon's a pretty tight network, and
That
and
that
like
I understand. Yeah, that could be like 70, 80%, right?
totally, yeah, and like just thinking through the fact that I would re-email the people who didn't respond the first time and collect some, oh, so sorry, I missed your first note responses.
Yep.
I don't think 80% is an unreasonable
Wow.
number.
So
Yeah.
you got a lot of responses out of those, let's say 300 to 400 responses, how many
Yeah.
people did you actually end up talking to? Or that 500 to 750, are you saying you talked to 500 to 700 people, or you reached that? That's unbelievable.
Yeah, but like this was kind of inefficient because it's not like I'm talking to bankers in each of those.
Of course. Yeah. But you're saying you actually got on the phone with that many people.
Every day of my junior fall was like me stepping out of the middle of a class to like take a call with somebody who was like available at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Even like second half of sophomore year, like it was just hopping on the phone whenever like anyone would be willing to speak with you.
You're doing
Or
like a call a day at least, or something like that, almost.
honestly probably like two or three.
2 or 3
Yeah.
calls. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that adds up.
And like some of those mattered way more than than others, but
Right.
yeah.
So you probably learned a ton on those calls, I assume.
Yeah, and one of the benefits to that was by the time you get in the interview room.
So I know where to focus the rest of this podcast. You're like the expert network, like informational phone interview person. So like, what exactly? How did you structure these so that they were most beneficial? I assume you got really good after like the first 50 to 100.
Yeah, well, so it's interesting because like early on you don't even know what to ask. You're kind of just fumbling around, and I think over time you get like different things out of the conversation. Like first you sort of just get a lay of the land. So like when I was trying to decide whether I wanted to do consulting or banking, I wanted to do something junior year. And one of the big takeaways that I learned was, hey, it's really tough from a non-target school to do a consulting internship after your junior year. Like there are far fewer of those because they want to leave open the opportunity to hire people full time from like investment banking or other types of backgrounds.
I didn't know
Whereas,
that. See, you just taught me that. I didn't
well,
realize they left more slots open.
yeah, so there's a lot more recruiting. Like it's very common to see a lot of people who go into consulting that didn't have internships in
Yeah.
consulting.
Okay.
Whereas in banking, if you're going to spend 2 years working 100 hours a week, then you kind of need to test that out and see what that's like. And so the banks, I mean, I don't know what the stats are today. You probably know this way better than I do, but just like the expectation is that you do a junior internship in order to have a
Oh yeah.
shot at a
Oh yeah.
role.
The yield on these is crazy. I mean, most banks are between 70 and 90%, some are analysts to full-time offer rate. And
Yeah.
the yield on that is still incredibly high. Although it has dropped a little bit. It's not like severe. The bigger problem for the banks is the attrition and the
Right.
analysts leaving so early or being checked out because private equity recruiting happens so fast. But that's a different story.
Yeah,
So
so logically in my head, I was like, okay, I can't, like, there's only going to be one option junior summer, and that creates two paths because, consulting firms are very interested in hiring people who have just gone through this, intensive 10-week crash course in being responsible and modeling and, all the things that go into investment banking. And so I thought, why not try and pursue that and see what, coming out of an internship makes more sense if I have two routes. So at that point, I kind of narrowed my focus. I would say that was kind of like during the Tuck program is when I was like, okay, I'm going to go full speed ahead towards just investment banking. And, that's when I doubled down on like, doing a modeling course and stopped talking to people in consulting, like stopped proactively reaching out and like just focused towards IT. Yeah.
okay. And so when you got on these calls, as you got better, would you keep it more conversational? How was your tone? How was so they're like, hey, Paul, how can I help you? Like, what would you even start off with?
Yeah.
I think that's helpful to hear because a lot of these kids are so nervous especially when they first start out. So just giving a little bit of a framework, not that they have to be robots and read a script, but
Yeah, of course. So there are all different kinds of people that'll get on the phone. Some of them are rushed. Some of them are actually people that are having a bad day. You never know what you're gonna have to deal with. And so
I'm busy. What do you need? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
What do you want? What do you want, kid?
Yeah. and like I remember some people who would, be interested in just small talk at the beginning, and you kind of need to be able to read that. Um, but there were a number of conversations where people were short, people didn't seem to want to engage, and so one thing that I started doing after I don't know how many of those uncomfortable conversations was, I noticed that at every call, at some point, transitioned to my story. And so if I felt like it was awkward, my like safe phrase was just, "Well, thanks so much for getting on the phone. Would it be helpful if I told you a little bit about myself?" And then that's a great way for them to like one either start to get engaged and interested, or like now there's not even small talk, they can completely check out. That just kind of transitioned the conversation to a more like predictable structured frame, because then you know where it's going, you tell your 2-minute story. And I found that a lot of people were way more willing to engage after that than at the beginning, because then it's, oh, okay, this guy has relevant background, it seems like he's doing some of the right things. I'm connected to him for whatever reason I figured out to connect to that person because of, and from there you start to get into more of the typical questions about, would love to hear more about your experience in X group, Y company, and it can kind of more organically flow from there, but you've built up some credibility if you're speaking out of a 2-minute story that's effective.
And how did you structure that story? Was obviously you'd be referencing your program at Tuck and how you came from non-target, but you're working towards,
Yeah.
trying to better yourself and whatnot. Is that kind of the main framework that you used?
Yeah, it's sort of like you build your story such that you come from the right background for whatever they're interested in. So like the fact that I was majoring in math and economics mentioned. I looked at the stats at some point. Like I pulled this off of LinkedIn, but the number of athletes in investment banking, the percentage is crazy, or it was when I looked at this a few years ago. And so referencing that I did a sport, that I'm competitive, like learning to hit on some of those things that kind of
It's funny. We had the most athletic investment banks because we actually ask questions on like interviews and like our compensation salaries. We ask, or did you play a varsity sport in your college? And so we have a list of like who the biggest, like the most athletic banks versus the least athletic.
that's really
I'll have to pull it up. I haven't looked in years. I don't even know who it is now. But sorry. Go
yeah.
ahead.
No. But it was just like I think I scraped like 10 liberal arts schools, and like 80 to 90% were some sort of varsity athlete in college.
Yeah.
So just hitting on things like that, I think, was important as kind of fitting the mold. And then my progression, I think, was the other main piece. So here's why I chose, like, very quickly hitting on, here's why I chose math and economics. I love working with numbers. I'm competitive, and so like coming from that, I knew I wanted to do something in finance, and I did this internship, which I really liked X element that's related to investment banking. And I really felt like it was missing Y element, which is, also related to investment banking. And so went to the Tuck program that confirmed that, this is really where I should be. And every moment up until this conversation is like culminating in me wanting to be in investment banking. I mean, like that's kind of the formula.
Yeah, that's helpful. Okay, that's actually really helpful. Thank you. So they were more receptive after that. You had a good conversation, and then typically would you end it with, is there anyone else you think I should speak with, or I'd love to, stay in touch, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So I think one of the questions that I would always ask is, what would be your advice for me coming from a non-target school to get my foot in the door at Deutsche Bank or whatever, the bank would be? And that was kind of a softball question too, in a way, because it's not asking for a referral, right? It's like, it's indirectly saying, hey, do you want to help me? and like I had plenty of people who were like, well, like I'm happy to refer you, in the fall, reach back out. And I had a number of other people who like weren't uncomfortable saying, oh yeah, just keep doing what you're doing, keep networking. And that's like an easy way for them to say no and for the conversation not to be awkward. And plenty of those people even were willing to connect me to somebody else at the bank. And so a lot of like those softball questions to like, follow up, have a reason to follow up later, a lot of, requests to talk to other people. I think I had talked to like 4 people in JP Morgan's real estate group at one point.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like, you just kind of work your way
Around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fair. Okay. So you end up doing the internship, winter analyst internship. Tell me about
Yeah.
that. What's going
Yeah.
on? How are you land a winter internship? I don't even know. I've heard of this, I believe, but is this something in the Chicago office?
Yeah. So that was in the Chicago office.
Do they have winter internships because they've realized it's better to be in the office all night instead of being in
So, so,
Chicago
so
cold?
yeah, exactly. So they did this every year, and they would have one intern, and I had no clue this was even a thing, and I wasn't even really going for it. So to rewind, so I come back, I reconnect with every single person I know who's in any way connected to investment banking, and there was a Wheaton alum whose cousin worked at Morgan Stanley in their investment banking division. And this Wheaton alum is super nice. He's like, let me introduce you to my cousin. He's the smartest guy I know. I'm sure he'll be helpful to you. And so this guy, he gets introduced to some Wheaton student from his cousin. He's like, okay, sure. Like, I'm super busy, but I'll connect with this guy. Um, and he knows that I'm interested in going out to New York for the summer. Like, I've got this fall break lined up where I have, I'm planning to meet with all these banks. I'm going to figure out how to piece together a schedule. Like, as I fly up there, I think I had like 10% of those chats set up as I flew out there, and the rest figured itself out once I landed.
Yeah.
But this guy in Chicago was just sitting down beforehand to talk me through and give me advice and say, hey, here's this part of your story I'd tweak, or, be ready for these kind of questions. Cause when you go and sit down in Goldman, like, they're not just going to like want to chat with you to chat. Like, they're going to ask you some questions too. And so he basically tested me on some technicals and was really, really helpful, really nice guy. So did this New York visit, went really well, got to meet with a bunch of banks. And I came back from that and I just shot him a thank you note, like, hey, this trip to New York went really well. Thanks so much for your help. Um, talk to you at some point in the future. And so I didn't think anything more of it. And this was probably in early October.
Mm-hmm.
And in early November, I get a voicemail, and it's from this guy, and he's saying how, hey, Paul, I know that you're interested in New York for IB roles for the summer, but we just finished doing recruiting through Northwestern U Chicago for our winter analyst role, and we didn't like any of the candidates. We're thinking of scrapping the program for this year, but if this is something you're interested in, then give me a shout, and maybe I can like convince them. I know you're not coming from like a school that we're used to hiring from, but maybe I can convince like one of the associates who's involved in recruiting to talk to you and take it from there. You probably have to take off for your spring semester for Q3 because this will be, on
You're like,
site.
hell yeah, no problem.
I'm like, I will figure it out,
Yeah.
And fortunately, I had the credits to do that, so I was able to basically just
Not graduate late.
Yeah, I only took Q4 credits that semester, and basically, I reached back out to the guy. I was like, yeah, absolutely, would love to chat with whoever. And by the time I got on the phone for what was essentially that first round interview, I had already done 200 of these, 300 of these, like telling my story. I had just been in, New York, sitting down with banks doing this process, and so it just felt like I was doing this thing that I, did every day.
Second nature to you at that point. It was like riding a bike.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if students who like have had to network a lot coming into these kinds of interviews tend to have a higher hit rate in the interview because they've already told their story so many times. Like, I think that's a silver lining for people coming from, backgrounds where they have to do networking, or even just for students who are proactive from target schools who are connecting with alumni. Like, the fact that you come in and it's
You feel
second
like
nature.
you were naturally like, I mean, because you speak well. Do you feel like you're naturally kind of gifted in that though?
Um, I don't
I
know.
think that some people are just, you know, they really struggle with it. They maybe are more like on the engineering side, a little more technically competent, but they just, in terms of interaction, it's almost like I think of this as like a different layers of intelligence. And there's like a social EQ aspect and there's the IQ aspect. Sometimes when people are very high on the IQ aspect, they lack a little bit of EQ, which is
Yeah,
super. It's hard on the phone, especially when you're not getting facial approval or anything like that to really understand. A lot of things become much more direct and
yeah.
transactional, like you said, rather than a conversation. I feel like you don't you don't seem to. I mean, even though you're a math major, you don't seem like a lot of the math majors I know. So, do you feel like that is a it was easier for you, or you still feel like were you really fumbling at the beginning? Like because
Um,
to do that many calls, it seems like you were really comfortable with it, or did you just force yourself to do
I definitely forced myself. I mean, I don't know what my starting point is. I think what I'll like say is this. I think maybe there are like a very small percent of people that like are so far towards um, the low social
it?
EQ
EQ.
or whatever you want to call it, that like it really will be tough to get over the hump. But like the vast majority of people who would be like, listening to something like this or interested in these types of roles are, more than capable. Like honestly, like I'm an introvert and I did 300 of these calls or 400 of
Yeah,
these calls. So I think like at the end of the day, it's about, okay, I can learn from this end call and it will benefit me for the n plus one and n plus two call and n plus three. And like as you start to have more of these conversations, you learn more about what this like group of people is interested in talking about or like expects to hear. And one of the super valuable things that I would get from a lot of these people is feedback on my story, so that by the 10th conversation I was speaking much more effectively than I was in the first one. So very painful at first, but you figure it out, like
yeah.
regardless.
Okay, that's fair. So you somehow, so you're getting this interview for this winter analyst position at Morgan Stanley. It's like a dream out of like a movie, but you did knock on a lot of doors, so we'll give you
Yeah.
credit. So this door opens up, and you kind of are you nervous, even though you've done so many of these, or are you just like, hey, if it doesn't work out, whatever, I'll keep going.
Yeah. Well, I'm nervous and I'm also trying to figure out, okay, how does this work for the summer? Right. Um, and
Were you hoping they maybe would give you a summer analyst
yeah,
offer as well?
yeah, which I did receive.
You did. Okay. So tell me, so you took time off from school. You started in January. You took
Yeah.
a quarter off, right? And you just showed up to the office. I mean, what was it? What was it like? So you obviously they said, okay, we would like you to come in. You talked with the associate and a few other people, I assume, and it went well.
Yeah. So I talked to the associate over the phone and passed his screen. And so then I came in for a super day and
Mhm. With you and by yourself or with other people?
no, it was like a Paul super day.
Or Paul Super Day, okay, because they had already rejected everyone else.
Yeah, yeah. So like in some ways the odds are pretty good. It's like a yes or no. Do they want to bring
The odds are good, but it's also like, why did they reject everybody else?
right?
Did you get any feedback on when he said that we don't like any other candidates? Did you ever talk to them more in depth about why?
Not really.
It's
I
just
was
unbelievable to me that
yeah.
that
I
worked out. Okay, so you're in there, you do the super day, you get through. How many? A lot of technicals, I assume. Were they trying to grill you because you're from a non-target?
yeah. I mean, I think that some people saw like, oh, this guy built a DCF during his Tuck experience, and like one guy like went into depth. We talked about like how much the terminal value was as a percent of total, like, and did my I mean I, I did well enough to pass, I guess, but like he definitely was playing bad cop. There were other people that just wanted to hear about my background. Yeah, it was kind of everything from behavioral to technical.
The bad cop technical interview who started drilling on the DCF harder and harder and harder. How did you handle that in terms of like, did you say at some point, I'm really not sure? Did you like draw a line somewhere? Because I feel like oftentimes people struggle and flounder, and they sometimes it's better for them just to say, I don't know.
Yeah, I think there were a couple things that were like important to that interview, which were one that like I kind of saw it as a game and like, an important, interview, but also like, it's okay. Like, I know that this guy is trying to push me and like, I'm up to the challenge. Like, okay, he wants to drill there deeper. And so like, I was kind of still smiling that whole time while trying to figure out whatever, new curveball he was throwing. I, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a point where I like, did say, I'm not really sure.
Mhm.
And there was one answer that I remember giving. I can't even remember to what it was, but he was like, huh, like whatever percent. Yeah, that doesn't really seem realistic to me. Anyways, next question. And he just like kept moving on. So like he was definitely,
Yeah.
trying to push my buttons. And I think part of it is just staying composed in those kind of situations.
Yeah, do you
Uh,
start panicking and floundering or not? So
yeah.
I want to keep going because
Sure.
it's
Yeah,
going,
yeah.
and I don't want to keep you too long. But like, you get a full-time offer to join in the summer. Why not go to Morgan Stanley a summer analyst role? 3 months there. Did you not like the experience, or what was the thought process?
So I think that my investment banking internship that I did over the winter was like the most um, concentrated like learning per hour spent in my entire career.
Hmm.
So even though I decided I didn't want to do that full time, like I'm still, a huge advocate for students to, pursue that route. I think you learn so much. That was such a critical part of not only my skill set, but kind of my brand going into consulting too, where it's like, oh, we're going to put this guy on, any of our like modeling projects. That was a big part of me, making the internal transition at McKinsey to this, really exciting group that did merger management and transactions work was the fact that I had done this investment banking experience.
Hmm.
Um,
But
so
let's talk about a little bit, like, so you get to the end of the winter analyst stint in March
yeah,
of that year, and they offer you to come back that summer in Chicago,
yeah. So they offered for me to come back for the
and you said
summer.
no flat out right then and there.
So I said yes,
You said yes.
and
Okay.
I ended up coming down with pneumonia. So this doesn't happen to everybody who does an investment banking internship, but I got walking pneumonia and got pretty sick.
Mm.
Uh,
Was
Probably
it the
like
hours? Was it the hours?
I think. I mean, that's something that I've always struggled with in consulting, even, and I think I've gotten a better grip in PE. But this is, probably boring to hear for like an 18 to 22-year-old. But like, I really do think your 20s in a lot of ways are like learning what your body can handle, and that changes over time. But like that, I was drinking a
As
lot.
as we're both at standing desks right now, I have back pain. I'm
Exactly.
40. Like, you're probably in better shape, you're much better shape than I am. But yeah, so
Yeah.
okay.
So like a lot of it was probably the hours, but also like the fact that I was just like in an environment where I was drinking a lot more than usual. And this is the most dramatic drop off in exercise that I had ever had, right? Like I'm an athlete and like for the first time in my life, I haven't done anything for 10 weeks. Like I was just like a physiologically different person by the end of this internship. So like I am a best practice, like worst practices person when it comes to like taking care of yourself during
Mhm.
um, an experience like this. But
You were
I,
working 90-hour weeks, 100-hour weeks?
yeah, I think I averaged a little over 100. But my worst was only like 115.
Oh, that's it, 115?
Well, I've heard horror stories. I think
No,
like
I
on
know, I've heard.
Oasis from people. Um,
Okay, so you got trial by fire, you got to the end. Was the pneumonia near the end?
yeah, I didn't even know that I had it until
Okay.
like afterwards.
So you
And
said yes, and you got really sick in that spring.
Yeah, and I tried to come back like I did the first week of training and basically in New York, and then I came back and the first night I was up till 4 a.m. on a sell side deal, and like my lungs just like completely retightened up on me, and I was like, oh god, like what am I about to go through again? And over the course of the next few days, my lungs got worse, and I just basically had a conversation with them, and I was like, look, you guys know what I'm capable of doing and what my work product is like. You've gotten to see me for 10 weeks. I don't think that I can physically do this for the summer. And so they were like, okay, like we understand, like, let's have a
Did you
conversation.
have a doctor's note at that point to prove that something was wrong with you, or you just knew something was wrong with you? You had like a gut instinct.
I can't. I did go to a doctor. I can't remember if it was after or before to like go get on antibiotics, but like I already had a good relationship with them, so it wasn't the kind of thing where like they needed that from me because they knew. I mean, I had worked
You
with
knew
them.
you were a workhorse. Yeah.
I worked for them for 1,000 hours at that point, so they knew they could
Okay.
trust me.
Okay.
So it's sort of like okay, let's have a conversation at the end of the summer if you're interested in coming back. And I took the summer. I ended up doing a different kind of like much lighter internship for the second half of the summer, and just like cobbled something together once I was healthier. I pitch it differently, in conversations, but basically, I used that summer to get healthier again, and was like, I think I want to find something that's a little bit less intensive
Sure.
for some time.
Okay. So you got into, so you finished that. You kind of, I assume the place that you interned at also wanted you back full time.
That was actually just kind of a
No,
favor from my network, where I was
got
like,
it.
"Oh, yeah, we can bring somebody on for the summer." Like
So
they
did you
were,
enter senior year with nothing?
yeah. So I enter senior year, and I decide to. Well, and I should say this. So, and cut me off whenever
No, no, it's good.
you need to go. But so the funniest part of all of this was that I was in the winter analyst role during the recruiting process for the summer. So I got to see on the inside of this investment banking recruiting machine and watch how it happened. Um, and at the same time, they didn't say anything about the summer, so I was like going down to the lobby to like get on a Credit Suisse first round and like talk about why I'm interested in that bank. Um, and so I was going through all these other processes, and all of a sudden, it reached this awkward point where I hadn't heard anything from Morgan Stanley about the summer, and I had 2 super days in New York for other banks, and I was like, "Hey, I need to take a day off." And they're like, "What are you talking about? This is an investment internship. You don't take a day off." And I
Mhm.
was like, "Well, I." And I talked to the associate that I was close with at the time, and it's like,
Yeah.
I've got super days at other banks, and like I don't know what's the deal for the summer. And so, like very quickly, the MD that I worked a lot with, like conferred with the other MDs, and they like very quickly like gave me a summer offer, and was like, "You can't go to New York. We need you working." um, but yeah, I got to be there while we were interviewing for the Chicago office and see, like, I legitimately was sifting through resumes and filtering who should be in the short list. So like one of the big like realizations for me was just how imperfect and human this process is.
Mhm.
And the fact that I think a lot of students early on think that they're going to get this careful evaluation of whether or not they're a good fit. And it's really no, like, can you catch the attention of someone on that boat because it is leaving the harbor and you need them to toss you a life vest?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. No, I agree. I think it's kind of a naive freshman, sophomore, maybe juniors are a little more
Yeah.
a little more realistic once they've been rejected for all the sophomore internships. But okay, so you kind of get
So I
into
come out
senior
of the
year.
summer.
Yeah, so you come out of the summer, and then the senior year, I guess you still felt like you kind of had Morgan Stanley in the back pocket potentially full time. You had already kind of done. It seems like you had really strong relationships there after busting your butt for that
Yeah.
winter.
Yeah.
So
And I think like the first few weeks that I was like, transitioning back to campus, it was kind of like okay, if I don't call them in the next couple of weeks, then like that's
the
not a good indicator. So there was definitely like a good month and a half period where I felt like I didn't have that anymore, and that I needed to create a new opportunity.
So how did you shift to like prepping for consulting interviews? Suddenly everything you've done for almost over a year now had been banking, banking, banking.
So I mean, the here's the way that I like thought about it. So I had built up all of this experience in connecting with people in a field that wasn't for people from non-target schools like me, right? Like that was my like main skill that I had developed,
Hmm.
and I knew how to craft a story, and so I reconfigured my story for consulting.
Hmm.
Um, I think an important part of this is that I decided that consulting would be interesting, and like I had the motivation to go after it because I was excited about the prospect of working at
You
you
could
know
be
one of
genuine. You could be genuine, which is key.
exactly yeah
Yeah.
yeah, and so so I started just basically tailoring my story to fit consulting. Talked about how much I got out of the investment banking internship, um, but conveyed why I wanted to do this, and I started having tons of conversations with people doing that, and
Did you tell them that you got a pneumonia and that you were working over 100 hours a week?
I left out the pneumonia part, but I definitely mentioned the 100 hours a week part. Um,
Got it.
I definitely mentioned that. Yeah. So I think the biggest piece then was transitioning to like behaviorals. I had like 100 different behavioral stories from the investment banking internship that I could easily use. It was really just okay. How do I connect with people in consulting, and how do I do case prep, and what resources can I use? And I was basically spending the fall doing that and trying to. It's funny, like your GPA matters the most, like sophomore and junior year,
Hmm.
and then like nobody look. I guess if you're going to business school and people look at it, but otherwise, it doesn't really matter after that point. So it's just how do I keep my grades afloat while
Yeah.
doing all this prep?
So you start drilling case interviews, with some friends, I assume, or like, who did you even find?
Yeah,
There's lots of resources online. We have a case, consulting case interview course. But there's tons out there that are great. There's case books you can get for free. To
yeah.
start off. So is that what you did? You just started drilling yourself, or were there a mentor you had in the consulting space?
Yeah, I basically had to find, a number of people to help. And I kind of did this myself, but like the analogy I like to use with this for people who are trying to prep is that it was kind of like learning how to golf, or really like any other kind of sport like that. So, I could get out there and, try and figure out how to swing. Um, and you could take 1,000 different balls out to the range and like dump them and just swing as many as you can. And, you know, that can be one approach. Or if you take 20 balls and each time you take a swing, like somebody who knows what they're doing gives you feedback, tinkers with your form a little bit, like you're going to get way better off of 20 swings than you will off of 1,000 unguided swings. So for me, it was what are the resources I need to like be
Hmm.
able to even have this conversation, like buy a golf club, right? Buy some golf balls, and then go and have these conversations. And if I built rapport with some consultant, or like for example, one of the TAs from the bridge program, he worked at Bain, and so he gave me a great case, which is now my like go-to case that I use for any student that comes to me that wants to do cases.
Uh-huh.
Um, just like people like that give you a case that they've given in real interview
Mhm.
situations, and then tell you, hey, here's how you should think about reapproaching this kind of problem in the future. Like that was the super valuable stuff.
That's awesome. So you drilled and you drilled, and you got a first round interview. How at McKinsey? Now you've done it again for a second time in a row. You landed an internship at Morgan Stanley from a non-target, and now you get an internship. I can understand how you get McKinsey easier because now you got Morgan Stanley. Um,
Yeah, but it's still like you really need some like I remember sitting at Morgan Stanley's table over lunch, and we had a stack of like 1,000 resumes, and we split them up amongst people as we were eating Chipotle, and like we just went through as quickly as possible because like this is taking time away from analysts' other like real job to try
oh
and
yeah,
filter.
it's literally like this. Sometimes less than 5 seconds, and you're like,
Yeah, and some like off comment about like, oh, this guy, somebody misinterprets something and you get pulled out, or like guacamole drops on part of a resume and like maybe they stick together and somebody completely misses you. Like it's really like for me getting
the
any of my
guacamole ding. Don't get hit by the guacamole ding.
yeah, exactly. Um, I remember like this applies from banking too. Like I think so. I got interviews at well, I don't know what classifies as bulge bracket now, but essentially all but Deutsche Bank, and that was the one where I did not have any close connections. And I think the same applies for consulting. So I interviewed at Bain and McKinsey and didn't have any connections at BCG. But it's really just through, continuing to push,
Yep.
and getting enough. It's kind of a function of your experience and, whoever's pushing your resume through and really being an advocate for you. And
You
what I
made
will
enough.
say,
Yeah, you made enough connections. Clearly, I mean, you got in the interviews. Did you feel like you nailed it right away, or was McKinsey later on? How did you kind of get to those super days?
yeah, I felt like the case interview went well over the phone, but I was nervous through the whole process. Like, I had built up all this momentum in IB, and then, realized that, oh, I don't think I want to go down that route. Well, shoot, like, I've put in all this effort, and so I was honestly stressed through this entire process, and probably like a pretty harsh critic of myself. So like I remember walking out of the super day for McKinsey and thinking that I didn't get it. Um, and then got the call that night or whenever it was. But like I was very stressed this whole time. So I think, if I could go back, I think a huge part of this is just, finding the things that keep you sane and keep you resilient during this process, whether that's like for me, I think I neglected running at the time, and like that would have been a huge boost to my confidence. So
Sure.
um I mean, it worked out, but I think it could have been a little bit less painful. So
No, I think yeah, staying fit is big. Yeah, so let's now switch over to talking a little bit more about what it was like to actually work at McKinsey. And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick at wallstreetoasis.com. And until next time.